Amelia, a hard-working single mother, follows her teenage son Jake and uncovers a shocking secret. He's been caring for his long-lost grandfather, Eric, a man who abandoned her family decades ago. Faced with a whirlwind of buried pain and unexpected truths, Amelia grapples with forgiveness, while Jake finds hope in his bond with Eric. But when a woman enters the picture, the fragile trust between them is put to the test. Can Amelia forgive the man who shattered her childhood? Will their newfound family ties survive or crumble under the weight of the past? It was a chilly November morning when Amelia noticed the first signs of something wrong with her son, Jake. It wasn't anything dramatic, not at first, just subtle things. A shadow under his eyes, the way he'd leave the house in a hurry and return with flushed cheeks and barely a word to spare. Then came the final straw, a call from his school. "Ms. Rivera," the school secretary's voice crackled over the line. "We've noticed that Jake has been missing his last 2 classes every day for almost 2 weeks now. Is everything all right at home?" Amelia's heart sank. She knew every corner of Jake's young face, every detail about his likes and dislikes, or so she thought. But this, her stomach twisted as she considered what could pull her son away from his classes. Gangs? Bad friends? Or worse, drugs? She refused to let her imagination spiral, but the ache of fear gnawed at her. The next day, she waited for Jake to leave for school, keeping a careful distance as she followed him down the sidewalk. Her eyes stayed glued to him, her heart pounding as she wondered just where he'd go. And then he turned a corner she'd never known him to take, a path leading not toward school, but toward the outskirts of town, the old warehouse district. For nearly an hour, Amelia waited outside in the cold. At last, curiosity overpowered her hesitation, and she slipped inside the building, her footsteps barely audible against the dust-laden floors. What she found inside stopped her heart. Amelia was stunned to see her son, surrounded by worn bags of groceries, carefully preparing sandwiches for a group of homeless men and women huddled around a small space heater. The cold air carried the smell of canned soup heating on a hot plate, and Jake's voice carried across the room as he spoke to a frail, elderly man with weathered hands and a soft, grateful smile. Amelia struggled to understand. Why was her son here, cooking for these strangers? Jake glanced up and saw her, his eyes widening in horror. He froze, a stack of sliced bread slipping from his fingers. Amelia took a step forward, her heart racing with a mixture of confusion, pride, and something she couldn't quite name. "What are you doing here, Jake?" she whispered, feeling a tremor in her voice. He looked down, fidgeting with the bread in his hand. I didn't want you to know," he mumbled, his voice thick. "You're always working so hard, Mom. I wanted to help. I found this place and started bringing extra food here." Her heart clenched as she took in his words, her chest tight with a mix of emotions she couldn't unravel. But as Jake looked up at her, his eyes held something she hadn't expected, a flicker of sadness, even anger. She swallowed hard, trying to understand. "You did this on your own?" He nodded, his face flushed. "Mom, there's something you don't know. The man I help here." He hesitated, glancing back at the elderly man who'd slowly risen to his feet, eyes cast down in shame. Amelia's mind raced. There was something in Jake's expression that warned her this wasn't just a simple act of kindness. The air in the warehouse felt thick as Amelia tried to comprehend the scene in front of her. Jake, her quiet, thoughtful boy, had been disappearing into this cold, run-down place every day, working to feed a group of strangers. But why? And who was this elderly man standing so quietly? A shadow of recognition crossing his face as he looked at her. Jake's hands shook slightly as he took a deep breath, eyes darting nervously between Amelia and the man. "Mom," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's more I need to tell you." Amelia took a step forward, her heart hammering in her chest. "Jake, who is he? And why didn't you tell me?" The old man looked down, wringing his hands. He was thin, with a weather-beaten face, his clothes worn but clean. There was something about him, something in the way he glanced at Jake that stirred an old, buried memory in Amelia, something she couldn't quite place. Jake took a shaky breath, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and resolve. "Mom, this is Grandpa." The word echoed in the empty space, sinking into Amelia like a stone. Grandpa? She felt a rush of memories flood her mind. Her father's face, his laughter, and eventually his disappearance from her life. Years ago, he had left without a word, leaving her mother shattered and struggling to keep the family afloat. She had believed he was gone forever, maybe even dead. What? Her voice shook, disbelief coloring every syllable. She turned to the old man, her eyes searching his face, desperate for a sign that this couldn't be true. Why, after all these years? The man's eyes filled with a deep sadness, his voice frail. "Amelia," he said quietly, his voice cracking under the weight of her name. "I never meant. I didn't know where else to go." Her mind raced, torn between anger and an odd, unexpected sadness. This was the father who had left her and her mother to struggle. The man who had disappeared from their lives without a single word. And now, here he was, standing in front of her like a ghost she thought was gone forever. Jake reached out, his fingers brushing her arm gently. "Mom, please. I only found out a few weeks ago. I saw him on the street and he recognized me somehow. We talked, and he told me everything." "Everything?" Amelia's voice came out harsher than she intended, her emotions raw and jumbled. "Yes, everything," Jake continued, his face earnest, pleading. "He told me he left because he thought you'd be better off without him. He made mistakes, Mom. He knows that. But now, he's got nowhere else to go." Amelia felt the tears prick at her eyes as she looked at her father's worn face. She had imagined this moment 100 different ways, each one filled with questions, accusations, and the anger she'd buried long ago. But now, facing him, all she could feel was the deep ache of lost years, a history they could never reclaim. She took a deep, steadying breath and met her father's gaze. You just left, Dad. You left us with nothing." He nodded, a faint tremor running through him. "I know, Amelia, and I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I've done nothing but think of you and your mother every day since I left. I came back, hoping maybe one day I could make it right." The silence between them was heavy, weighted by the years and the secrets they'd kept from one another. Finally, Amelia looked at Jake, who had been quietly watching the exchange, his eyes full of hope and worry. "Mom," he said softly, "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to hurt you, but I've been coming here every day, bringing him food, talking with him. He told me stories about when you were little, stories I'd never heard before." Her heart clenched at the thought. Jake, who had been denied a grandfather all these years, connecting with him in secret. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. Jake shrugged, looking down. "I didn't want you to hate him or me." "Oh, Jake." Amelia pulled him close, her arms wrapping around him as she fought to keep her own emotions in check. She glanced over his shoulder at her father, standing quietly, a haunted look in his eyes. The anger was still there, but there was something else now, too, something she hadn't felt for him in years. Compassion, maybe. Finally, Amelia turned to her father, her voice firm. "If you're staying in town, you're not staying here in the cold. We'll figure something out." Her father looked up, a spark of hope in his eyes. "Amelia, I don't deserve that kindness." "It's not about what you deserve," she said, her voice steady. "It's about what Jake deserves, and he deserves the chance to know his grandfather." She gathered herself, feeling the weight of her own words settle within her. She didn't forgive him. Not yet, maybe not ever, but she would allow him this one chance, for Jake's sake, if nothing else. The three of them walked out of the warehouse together, the quiet streets echoing with the sound of their footsteps. Amelia didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew one thing. Things would never be the same again. The days that followed Amelia's decision to help her estranged father passed in a tense blur. Every morning, she'd watch Jake prepare a small bag of groceries before slipping out to spend time with his grandfather. Amelia couldn't deny the change in her son. He walked a little lighter, and for the first time in years, she saw a sense of pride in him. But inside, she wrestled with her anger and resentment. One evening, as Jake returned, he held an envelope with a hesitant look in his eyes. "Grandpa, he gave me this for you," he murmured, handing her the slightly crumpled letter. Amelia took it reluctantly, her fingers brushing the worn paper as her mind spun. She didn't know what to expect, but decided to open it that night, once Jake was asleep. Under the dim kitchen light, Amelia unfolded the letter, her eyes skimming her father's trembling handwriting. "Amelia, I don't know if you'll read this, but if you do, please understand that I have no right to ask for anything from you. I left all those years ago because I thought I was protecting you from a man who couldn't even take care of himself. I made mistakes, more than I can count. But the greatest one was abandoning you and your mother. Please believe me when I say there hasn't been a day I haven't thought of you, of the family I lost through my own failure. I know I'll never make up for the past. But seeing Jake, he's given me a second chance I don't deserve. He's a remarkable boy, Amelia, just like his mother. He sees the good in people, something I lost long ago. Thank you for allowing me these moments with him. If there's anything I can do to earn back a sliver of your trust, I'll do it. With love and regret, Dad." She folded the letter, her chest tight. Memories of her childhood, of the laughter before the silence, came rushing back, and her heart felt torn. She knew her father's words couldn't erase the pain of his absence, but something deep within her softened. The next day, Amelia joined Jake on his trip to the warehouse. Her father looked up, startled as she walked in. For a moment, they both stood there in silence, a sea of unsaid words stretching between them. Finally, Amelia spoke, her voice tight. "Dad, if you really want a chance to make things right, I need you to show up, every day. Be someone Jake can rely on." His eyes shimmered with a mix of hope and shame. "I'll do my best," he whispered. Days turned into weeks, and slowly a routine developed. Amelia's father began helping out at the diner, washing dishes, cleaning tables, small tasks that he handled with quiet dedication. Regulars at the diner noticed him, nodding in recognition but saying little, as though sensing the weight of his silence. One day, Jake entered the diner excitedly. "Mom, Grandpa told me he used to work as a chef when he was younger. Do you think he could maybe cook here sometimes?" Amelia paused, feeling a pang of hesitation, but she saw the hope in Jake's eyes and felt a sense of responsibility. "All right," she agreed, turning to her father, "but just part-time for now. Let's see how it goes." That evening, as the kitchen filled with the aroma of fresh spices, Amelia watched her father move around the small space with surprising ease. She couldn't deny he was good, better than she'd expected. Customers complimented the food, and for the first time in a long while, Amelia felt a glimmer of pride in the man her father was trying to become. But just as things seemed to be finding a fragile balance, another shock awaited her. One evening, as they closed up the diner, a middle-aged woman entered, her expression troubled as her gaze fell on Amelia's father. He looked up, freezing as recognition dawned in his eyes. The color drained from his face, and he took a shaky step back. "Eric?" she whispered, her voice choked. "It's been years." Amelia felt her stomach twist. "Who is she, Dad?" Her father's face filled with remorse, and he cast a glance at Amelia, guilt evident in his expression. This is Linda. She's the reason I left." Amelia's world spun. The woman who had torn her family apart stood right in front of her. She barely heard her father's stammered words of explanation, his attempts to explain how he had fallen for Linda, how he had felt trapped, how he thought Amelia and her mother would be better off without him. Each word felt like a blow, and Amelia's hands shook as she grappled with the betrayal. "I thought you wanted to make things right." Her voice was filled with a pain that bordered on fury. "But all this time, you've been hiding the truth." Jake looked between them, confused and hurt. "Mom, what's happening? Grandpa, is this true?" Her father lowered his head, the weight of his choices seeming to collapse upon him. "Yes, it's true, and I know I've failed all of you in more ways than I can count." Linda, sensing the tension, excused herself with a sorrowful look, leaving Amelia, Jake, and her father in stunned silence. Her heart shattered as she processed the new betrayal layered on top of the old. Jake turned to Amelia, his young face filled with questions, and she could see the flicker of disillusionment in his eyes. He had trusted his grandfather. She had trusted him, for Jake's sake. And now, this? Amelia held back the tears threatening to spill. "Jake, let's go home." But her father reached out, his voice desperate. "Amelia, please. I made mistakes, yes, but don't take Jake away. I can't fix the past, but I'm trying. I'm truly trying." She turned to him, her face etched with pain. "Then try harder, because right now, I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Without another word, she walked out with Jake, her heart heavy. She had been prepared to forgive, to let him into their lives for Jake's sake. But now, doubt gnawed at her, casting a shadow over every choice she had made. As they left, Jake clutched her hand, his face a mix of sorrow and confusion. "Mom, will we still see him?" Amelia looked down at him, her heart breaking. "I don't know, Jake. I don't know." The days following the encounter with Linda were tense and silent. Amelia found herself questioning every decision she'd made since allowing her father back into their lives. The betrayal felt fresh, raw, as if she were a little girl again, watching her father walk out of their lives with no explanation. She worried for Jake, who had grown quiet and withdrawn, confusion clouding his usually bright eyes. But then, a week later, a message appeared on her phone. It was from her father. "Amelia, please, just give me one last chance to explain. Meet me at the diner after closing tonight. Alone." She hesitated, her finger hovering over the screen, debating whether she should respond. One last chance, she thought, reluctantly typing out a quick reply. "Fine." That night, after she locked up the diner and sent Jake home with a friend, she found her father waiting for her, standing awkwardly by the counter, his face lined with regret and exhaustion. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The memories of years without him, the hurt, the emptiness, filled the silence between them. Finally, he began, his voice thick. "Amelia, I don't expect forgiveness. I know what I've done, and I know it's unforgivable. But I want you to understand. I never stopped caring about you." She crossed her arms, her face impassive. "Then why did you leave us? Why did you think we were better off without you?" He sighed, sinking into a chair, his shoulders hunched. "I was weak, Amelia. She was a mistake, one I thought was worth everything. I thought I loved her, but I was wrong. By the time I realized what I'd done, I was too ashamed to come back." Amelia's heart ached with a mix of anger and sadness. "And you didn't think your own daughter was worth more than a mistake?" "No," he whispered, his voice breaking. "No, I knew you were, but I thought you would hate me for what I'd done, and I was too much of a coward to face it. I kept telling myself I was protecting you by staying away, but deep down, I knew the truth. I was just running." She felt tears sting her eyes, but held them back. "You left us with nothing, Dad. Mom worked herself to the bone to keep us going. And all that time you were out there hiding from your own family." He nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. "I know, Amelia, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. But when I saw Jake, when I realized who he was, I thought maybe this was my chance to make things right. Even if it's too late for you and me, I thought I could be there for him. He's a remarkable boy, Amelia, just like you were." She closed her eyes, the pain almost too much to bear. But she knew her father was right about one thing. Jake deserved a chance to have a family, even a flawed one. She didn't have to forgive her father, but she had to think about Jake. Opening her eyes, she looked at him, her voice quiet but steady. "If you want to stay in his life, you'll have to work for it every day, and I'll be watching." He nodded solemnly, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "I will. I promise you, Amelia, I won't walk away again." For the next few weeks, Amelia watched as her father slowly rebuilt his relationship with Jake. They spent hours together in the diner, cooking and cleaning, her father teaching Jake little tricks he'd learned over the years, small moments that made her heart ache with bittersweet pride. She noticed the way Jake's laughter filled the kitchen, a sound she hadn't realized she missed until it returned. But she also kept her distance, guarding her heart as she observed her father's efforts. She watched as he put in the work, showing up every day, even when Jake had questions that weren't easy to answer. And over time, she noticed her own anger softening bit by bit. One evening, as the diner was closing, Jake approached her, holding a small note. He smiled shyly, looking both proud and uncertain. "Grandpa gave me this," he said, handing it to her. Amelia took the note and unfolded it, her eyes scanning the familiar handwriting. "Dear Amelia, There are no words that will ever erase what I've done, no actions that can truly make up for it. But I want you to know that every day I am grateful for the chance you've given me to know you again, and to know Jake. I'm so proud of the woman you've become, even if I had no part in it. I'm proud of the mother you are, and I see so much of you in Jake. Thank you for letting me try. With all my love, Dad. As she read, she felt something loosen inside her, the final pieces of anger melting away, replaced by a reluctant acceptance. She wasn't ready to forgive him entirely, but maybe, just maybe, she could let go of some of the pain she'd been holding on to for so long. She looked up, meeting her father's gaze across the empty diner. "Dad?" she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "We'll take it one day at a time. For Jake." Her father nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek, gratitude clear in his eyes. "One day at a time, Amelia." And so, as the lights dimmed in the diner, Amelia felt a tentative hope take root. She knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust would take time, and forgiveness even longer. But for Jake, for the family they were slowly piecing together, she was willing to try. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more tales of family, forgiveness, and second chances, make sure to subscribe to our channel, HeroKind Stories. Share this video with anyone who might need a reminder of the power of love and resilience, and don't miss the next story we have for you. Click the video on your screen now.